Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name's Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and we have with us Dr. Laura Petracek. So, Laura, I thought today we'd talk about the fifth step. What is the fifth step in the 12-step program?
The fifth step, Fergal, is we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs.
That is absolutely petrifying.
Mm. Yeah,
God,
it's not for the faint of heart.
God, ourselves, and another. I mean, I think of all of those three, the admitting your wrongs to someone else is probably the easiest. There must be a process moving on from the fourth step where we really are collecting the inventory of our wrongs to actually then telling someone. What does admitting our wrongs to God mean? What does that look like? What does it mean? What can it mean?
I'd like to just go back a minute. So, actually, usually admitting we're wrong to someone else is the scariest
Is
proposition.
it all right?
Because
Okay,
admitting we're wrong to God, I mean, God's just there, whatever, not saying much, not really saying anything. We
right.
don't see the reflection, we don't see the response, the reaction to what we're sharing. But to me, it really takes courage to admit our wrongs to another human being because that's the scary thing, right? Are they going to accept us for who we are? Are they going to think we're a piece of, you know what? Or are they going to judge us? So that's a lot of the fears that people experience before they bare their soul to someone. Am I lovable after hearing all this crap that I did?
So really, the choice of that individual is very important, isn't it?
Usually it's someone's sponsor, but it could be someone in the clergy. It could be some random stranger.
It because the whole of the fifth step really does remind me of the confessional. It is a confessional process where you do actually go into a little room.
Well, having grown up Catholic, it is very similar to
Mm,
the confessional. And coming from Belfast, I take it you have your own
mm.
religious upbringing there. So it does have those overtones. I mean, the 12 steps in general are Christian based. And so it's not uh, unusual that it has that flavor of making confession or confessing our sins. And then, when we were growing up, we'd say, okay, let me see, 3 times for lying, 5 times for stealing. We just make it up. But this time, now as an adult and someone in recovery, you're not just making uh, stuff up. You're really going through what you wrote in your fourth step, and now admitting it in the fifth step. And another thing about admitting it to why it's scarier, but also positive to admit our faults to another human being is that a lot of times your sponsor will say, wow, I did that too. Or I had that problem too. Or wow, you think that's bad. Guess what I did?
Mm.
So that's another plus to
Yeah, yeah,
say
and
it's
that's
another
not
human
something that a priest would do in a confessional. Let's remember that.
being. Yeah, okay.
At least you hope not. So, I mean, let's talk about admitting our wrongs to ourselves. There's a lot of introspection in that, isn't there? I mean, it does lead on from the fourth, but to admit to ourselves means we have to recognize really all of the cognitive distortions that we've been using to protect ourselves and get through the day.
Right. Well, yes, doing our introspection, we have to get past our rationalizations of what we did, our minimizing of what we did, our excuses for what we did, blaming the other person for what we did. And those are hard defenses to get past because as human beings, we're not really good at taking responsibility for our behavior, accountability. We're like, well, she did this or he did that, or you would too if you were in my shoes. So it makes it much more difficult.
And I suppose really that's the key word that you said there, Laura, isn't it? It's accountability. We are taking accountability for our actions to ourselves. We are acknowledging our wrongs, our guilt almost.
Yes, we are acknowledging our wrongs, our guilt,
Mm.
and where we've fallen short.
Yeah.
Yeah, our shortcomings.
So, I mean, the process then does actually open the door to forgiveness, redemption, doesn't it? It's not all self abasement. It's not all self
Mhm.
flagellation, is it?
No, and it's not meant to be, mea culpa, beating yourself up. It
Mm,
it's meant to really kind of have be even-handed with our
mm,
inventory of ourselves. I mean, rarely is a person totally on the debit side or on the positive side.
mm,
And more often now, I hear sponsors telling their sponsees, don't forget to put the positives down about yourself because, yeah, this fifth step is really quite a beating. And,
mm.
to end up crawling on the floor is not the goal, but it's
Yeah.
more to get right sized. Okay, this I
Mm,
did was not so great, but hey, I have these positive qualities
yeah.
and a way of balancing them out. Now, again, most alcoholics and addicts, we definitely have wreckage of our past long behind us. So the
Mm,
first, fourth, and fifth step are probably going to be more on the debit side. But
yeah.
even so, we could look at or be reminded of our positive sides so we don't totally leave with a sense of extreme self loathing.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, we see in the fifth step the word God. Now, I mean, this leads us to the idea of well, what is an individual's higher power? I mean, is it a personal issue, or is it a universal issue, and does it matter really?
Well, it doesn't really matter what one decides who their higher power is.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, someone's conception of their higher power changes throughout the years.
Hmm.
Uh,
How would
so
that
it's not,
be?
oh, well, sometimes when people come in, they come from a religious background. So it's not unusual to have a Christian type of God or uh, some other type of religion. But as
Hmm.
time goes on, I've seen people kind of soften in that area, meaning they don't necessarily believe in the God of their childhood, but now have a more adult understanding and not a God that is mean and menacing and unforgiving, but
Hmm.
more loving and caring and understanding sort of higher power.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's moving perhaps away from organized religion that taught you as a child to developing your own sense of inner spirituality. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And you used the word softening. I like that word because I think it's really important to consider that in the fifth step. And you've already alluded to it. This is not about mea culpa. This is about having a balanced view whilst being honest. So the message does have to be softened to a certain extent, does it not?
Well, it doesn't have to be, but it certainly helps. Again, a lot of people come in the program totally feeling demoralized. Um, their self esteem is 6 feet under. I mean, they really feel really bad about themselves. So I don't think the intent of the fifth step is to feel worse, although when it's first laid out, the way it's structured, it looks that way because they don't ask any questions about what's positive about you. Though that type of inventory has been added probably the last 20 years or so. Like, what's good about you? What do you like about yourself? What do other people like about you? You know,
And I suppose this also speaks to the need for a supportive community because this whole process doesn't actually happen in isolation. It's not just you beating yourself up. It's in the context of a process. It's also in the context of a support system. and that other person is perhaps your sponsor, but there's more than one individual that you can draw support from, surely.
Right. Like I go to a Wednesday night meeting. It's a step meeting, and actually last night we read the fifth step, and then you talk about it, and it's really helpful and healing to hear other people talk about their sordid past, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm not so bad. Um, and it's also very supportive after the meeting when people usually stick around and talk and share. And so there's healing in a group setting, there's mutual aid there. Whereas if it's just you and one other person, yes, healing could happen, but there's much more, I think, positive regard for people in a group and unconditional regard. And that's
Yes,
really
yeah.
uh, supportive and healing.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase before, this concept of unconditional regard as a key feature of, peer support groups. And that I suppose that's so necessary that, when people are entering into the peer support process, they are vulnerable, they are fearful, and they are perhaps full of self-loathing and low self-esteem. And so that's really one of the key ingredients, isn't it? Without that, really, you don't have any kind of peer support.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, another way that I think about the fifth step is really it's taking away from the pejorative, bitter self-flagellation that some people might associate it with the 12 steps. Is really it's a realignment of one's moral compass to a certain extent, and I like that analogy because it takes out the emotion. It's just, a slight shift. The compass itself isn't wrong or flawed. It's just we're just going to turn we're going to turn the dial just a little bit to get back on track. That's how I've heard it described elsewhere.
Right. Part of it is to get back on track. But for some of us, because of the dysfunctional family that we grew up in, we never really had a track or moral compass to begin with, or we weren't taught one. So part of it is also learning about a moral compass or learning uh, the next right step or right living. Because again, some people in the families they grew up in didn't have that.
So going through the fourth step, setting up the moral inventory, talking about and contemplating the fifth step. It's a very challenging time for someone. I mean, can you talk about how challenging it is and how you overcome the fear of doing it and how maybe techniques to
Mm-hmm.
minimize emotional dysregulation might help you in this process?
Right. Well, there's a few tools that one could use. One is reading meditation books. Another is actually doing meditation, even if
Mm,
it's only 10 or 15 minutes a day to help get you centered.
mm.
Another is talking with other people, with your sponsor, about the fear you're going through with this process. Another tool I really like and use is journaling, just to get that fear out on paper. And it seems to take the power out of it. It lessens that fear energy. So, those are some of the suggestions or ideas I have.
So really, it's about using techniques to help you come face to face with this idea, and then having a supportive environment, a supportive group, and also
Mhm.
supportive sponsors. So it goes back to, I suppose, the sponsor, doesn't it? The quality of the sponsor and the relationship between, and as you say, the sponsee and the sponsor.
Yes, that's really key. I mean, it's analogous to what's the number one factor for healing and therapy is the positive relationship between the therapist and client. It's very similar between a sponsor and a sponsee. The relationship between the two of them is the number one factor of whether or not it will be helpful to the sponsee in healing for them.
So that, I mean, I was going to ask you, and I think half of me thought, well, don't ask the question, but is there a training course that you have to go through to become a sponsor? And I suppose really, actually, you've just got to go through the 12 steps, isn't it? Because everyone who is a sponsor has been through the same process that you're going through.
Yes, no, there's not a training program,
Yeah.
although I think it would be helpful, just like I think it'd be helpful for parents to have to go through a training program. But unfortunately, that's not the case either. So,
We're not talking about the University of Life here.
but but as a parent or a sponsor, you're in a very important role, a very powerful role.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's not just the University of Life, it's teaching people who are in a position of power, or even, therapists go through years of training of how that might impact a client, or, because unfortunately I've seen sponsorships go real bad. Just,
Why might they do that? Because the fifth step and the fourth step are really dependent on sponsors, aren't they? It's important to understand why it works and why it doesn't work.
well, I think sometimes people take on being a sponsor too soon. Like I've seen in the rooms, people have 3 months of sobriety and, oh, I could be your temporary or regular sponsor. Well, 3 months sobriety, you're rarely, finished detoxing. So I don't really think you're in a
Right.
good position to be a sponsor. Or they have another, there's a term, I don't know if you've heard of it, called 13 stepping, where it's usually male, female. So the man's a sponsor and the woman's a sponsee, and then things,
Hmm.
take a way different turn romantically or
Yeah.
sexually. And that's not really helpful for a woman who is newly sober.
No, no. So it is a responsibility,
It
and
is
it
a
is
responsibility,
it
and
needs
you
to be
need to,
taken seriously.
yeah, and you need to keep your motives in check.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what's my motive here? Is it, if it's not only to be helpful, like I know some sponsors, I think this is just terrible, but I mean, I know some sponsors that have people clean their house for them, do their taxes for them. I mean, they abuse that power, and it really unnerves me.
Yeah. So really, the only motivation that really should be driving a sponsor within this context is a desire to achieve and maintain and teach sobriety and recovery, isn't it?
Yes,
The sobriety and
that's
recovery
the
are the
purest
two.
motivation.
They're the pure, exactly. It's the purest motivation, and then really, unless you've got that, and unless it's demonstrated, then really sponsees should run a mile. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences going through the fifth step, and how what kind of supports that you got when you were going through that?
Well, my first fifth step, my first fourth and fifth step, I was in college. So I did it like a thesis. I had like 50 pages written. My sponsor's like, this is going to take us weeks. But that's how I approach things, or did approach things at that time. And, she was very comforting, and kind of shared with me some of her own experience. But also, another person who really helped me was my own therapist, because she knew a lot more than my sponsor did about my own background. And so that was really helpful. My therapist giving me unconditional positive regard and compassion. And like, how would you have known better growing up how you did to not do X, Y, or Z?
Hmm.
You grew up with people lying, stealing, drug dealing. They're all alcoholics. How would you know otherwise? So that was really helpful to me. Whereas my sponsor, she knew more of my drinking and drugging, but not my whole family of origin story. And so I also recommend to people, to my own sponsees or people who are in recovery that are in the rooms, to also talk to their therapist about it. And if they don't have one, maybe a good idea to get one, because a
Hmm.
sponsor isn't really trained professionally. And in a sense, they're in a professional role, though. I mean, granted, it's
Yeah.
a peer role, but it's a very powerful role. And
Mm.
so that's where I feel having a therapist is really helpful. And it also helps and so when you're doing your fourth and fifth step, it helps to have a deadline. Okay, so you have to be done with your fourth step, let's say October 30th, because you're doing your fifth step November 2nd. And so having
Yeah.
that deadline is kind of like school. This is when your paper's due, and this is when you're going to present your paper, present the fifth step. And that's really helpful because otherwise, I've known people who have spent months on the fourth step, and I'm like, oh, that's torturing yourself. Just
Mm.
set a date with your sponsor, and then you won't be going through this
Mm.
unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. So what I'm
Yeah.
hearing then is just really the importance of experience and boundaries and a commitment to the purest of motivations, and really that relationship between the sponsee and the sponsor is absolutely crucial, really, to progression through the steps.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Laura, we've unfortunately run out of time, but thanks again for your pearls of wisdom. I look forward to chatting with you again very soon, so thank you. Okay, folks, that's all for today. My name's Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.